the Draknek and Friends official podcast, where we peel back the curtain on puzzle games and the people who make them. I'm Syrenne, the producer at Draknek and Friends, and I'm joined as always by Alan Hazelden, the head Draknek at Draknek and Friends.
Hey.
Today we're joined by Samarth, who you may know from their work on Konkan Coast Pirate Solutions. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing good. Nice to be here.
Awesome. So, do you want to tell us a bit about the game?
Yeah, sure. So, Konkan Coast Pirate Solutions is a cozy puzzle game about helping pirate ships do pirate things. So, it's based on a grid, and the idea is that you have to figure out how the pirate ships navigate. So, you start off by placing some tokens on the grid, and you press play and see how everything works out. So, the idea is that you need to understand how the ships behave with each other, with the tokens, and what the different goals are. So there's a focus on like rule discovery. So it's light on tutorial, sometimes to its own demise. But the idea is that you slowly understand what the different interactions between ships and tokens and the different elements are. And hopefully there's a interesting story to go along with that.
Awesome. So, taking us all the way back, what got you into game development in the first place?
So I used to be a web developer before this. So working in a bunch of startups across Bangalore. So I think that was all done in languages like Python and JavaScript. And at some level, I thought maybe learning a lower level language would be beneficial to me in my craft as a programmer. So I started off with trying to learn C, and then kind of stumbled into game development because I just wanted something to make using C. And a lot of the people who use C or C++ generally are making things like games. And then I think I kind of found a few interviews or podcasts or talks about puzzles specifically, and it just seemed like it's as good a choice as any other. But then slowly I got a taste for it, and then it got more and more interesting. I think I am not somebody who gamed a lot growing up, or I wasn't passionate about video games playing, but it's the kind of craft itself that pulled me in. That once I started making games, I kind of understood just how deep the field is, just how expressive the medium can be. And I think puzzle games was something that is, at least from a coding point of view, easier to make because there is not as much requirement for mechanics, because things are like kind of slow and generally go step by step, and there's no like physics or multiplayer or things like that. So and then it just kind of got deeper and deeper as I went, that understanding how games are made and seeing how like people who are competent at making games and making puzzles specifically, just how much of an art there is to that. And that just kept drawing me in deeper and deeper. So I started off kind of in a way that's not very common, but then I kind of got sucked into it. So, but I'm glad to be here now, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually kind of a similar journey I went on, where initially I started making games just as it seemed like a fun programming challenge. Like I was into programming. Games are a thing you can do with programming. And yeah, like it took me a while too to go from like, oh, this is something I can do as a fun programming challenge, to like, oh, this is kind of fun in of its own right, to like, oh, this is really creatively rewarding. And then the final step for me was like, oh, now I hate programming. I'm curious. So you said that you're consuming material about puzzle games, and that made you go like, oh, yeah, this is as plausible as anything. Like, were there any specific puzzle games at the time that particularly drew your attention?
I think it was, I came across like Stephen Sausage Roll in some talk or some essay or something about it. And the message about the game was that it's like the pinnacle of design in some ways, that it's very pure in what it's trying to do, and it does it very well. And that for me was like a beacon that I could say, okay, this is, I mean, I don't remember exactly where I came across it, but I trusted the information enough to dive in. And it was brutally difficult. I think it took me many months and many attempts to even get started. But I think that was the first foray into it. And then getting into a couple of discords and including the Thinky Puzzle Discord, and just seeing just how people think about it and how people talk about it. So I was playing puzzle games just before I started making them, and that was my first entry, which I don't know if I would recommend anyone else get into it that way, but I managed to finish it, and it was such a compelling and rewarding experience that then I kind of got the hang of it, right? Because it feels like puzzle games are kind of a conversation between the developer and the player. I mean, I understand these things now. I didn't understand them in these terms at that point, but I think I kind of felt something like that, that what the developer is doing is finding very interesting things and then presenting them to the player. And I think that was the first game I remember playing. Then I played a bunch of the other, like Witness and Portal, and like A Good Snowman is hard to build. And I think I slowly got into the scene, you can call it, from there. And I think, yeah, that's the early games that I played were probably these. I don't remember if there were any other specific ones, but these really stand out.
Sure. And yeah, I mean, I think from playing Konkan Coast Pirate Solutions, you do really get a sense of like, oh, this is a game where the designer is interested in showing me interesting situations, interesting interactions. Did you have that realization fairly early on? Before we go there, like, was this game one of the first puzzle games you made, or had you made other smaller projects before it?
I think I'll say it's like the second game I made. The first one, it's called This Mouse Will Swim. It's a Sokoban where
Oh yeah, I
you're a
played it.
mouse. Yeah, you're a mouse and you're trying to push an ice cube into like a pit where it, at least in the fantasy of the game, it melts and you can swim there. And it's the general like ice mechanics where if the land is frozen, then like you slide across it, as well as if you push an ice block, it keeps moving until it's stopped by something else. And specifically, when you push an ice block, it freezes the ground. So it's like those three things kind of combine. And that was the first game I made. Again, that started off as something else. But I'd say that once I got deeper into it, I remember one point where I had an idea that, or at least I had a belief that every cell in the puzzle has to matter. So if there's no extraneous cell anywhere, and like in the grid, and I felt that the levels were very clunky, and I posted asking for advice on the Discord, and someone said like, you don't have to do that. You can just have extra cells as long as it gives space for the player to do things that are not crucial to solving the puzzle. Like specifically, if you need to push a block back inside, and there is a two block. I mean, I think this is kind of hard to explain, but basically, I got feedback that says that that principle doesn't make sense, and what you should be doing is trying to funnel players towards the interesting things, and so don't try to have rigid things in your games. And I think that helped. But I don't think I would say that that game is complete. Like I finished it and released it, but I released it mostly because I was tired and I had a bunch of things and I just want to be done. I think there's a little bit more there. I don't think I'm going to go and explore it again, but I think, yeah, that was the first game I'll say I made. A couple of game jams I think I took part in, again, back when I didn't understand this idea of helping the player out, right? That your role as a designer is to help the player understand what's interesting, not to, you're not their adversary, you are their consultant, I guess. So I made a couple of game jam games where I didn't understand that, but again, I think someone in the Discord pointed out, either in my game or in a very similar game, that don't make everything hard to do. Just make the interesting thing the crux of the puzzle, and make everything else simple and easy for the player to understand what is interesting and what's not. So that was, yeah, the first learnings, I guess. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting you commented specifically about making levels as compact as possible and how you found that in that game that might actually be a bad thing, because there's this tension where like it's very easy to design a puzzle which has a very rigid set of solution steps of like, oh yeah, you need to do this thing here and then this thing there, and because you've got a tiny space to work in, every step is like really constrained and you need to think a lot. And a lot of the time those puzzles can be hard, but they can be hard in a way that is maybe kind of samey with other games of the same type, or might be samey among all the levels. And they're not hard because there's a single interesting realization that you're having to have that's like a unique realization to this specific level. But at the same time, like before this conversation, I think I would have just said like, no, yeah, you should make your levels as small as possible. And the place I come from with that is like a lot of the time beginner designers make really big levels, and then to execute an idea, you need to like walk halfway across the level and grab a block and then push it over here and then go over there and then grab something. And there's a lot of steps that are just busy work and just like, okay, well, I need to do A. I can see that I need to do A, but to do A is going to take like 5 seconds of just moving around the level. And that's also bad in its own way. And so it's interesting that, yeah, if you make things too small, you'll have the opposite problem of like, there'll be too many sub-steps between the actually interesting things to reason about.
Yeah. I think, specifically the word I'd use is like claustrophobic. And you need to be claustrophobic in the places where the puzzle is, not in the busy work. I think that was kind of what I learned from that specific piece of feedback, that like someone saw my level and clearly could see that a couple of like extensions were just to facilitate one mechanic, which were not core to the puzzle at all. And having it over constrained and over claustrophobic was just making it annoying more than interesting. So I think that was the again, like one of the things that really pointed me in a direction to show just how much variety and depth and like wonder there is in all of these things.
What are some other puzzle games that you've played since getting into this, and maybe even since releasing Konkan Coast Pirate Solutions, that have like inspired you or made you think differently about the space?
All right, so I think I really like Patrick's Parabox. I think that's a game that has some of my aesthetic in mind, where it could have been a lot more difficult, but it's really constrained in that. Like Patrick shows a lot of constraint in making sure that the levels are as simple as possible, so that players can interface with the things that are interesting. I think a lot of really small games are fun. Like recently, I think Hempoli posted that the circular Sokobon, I don't remember what it's called, but I think a lot of the things that I have now gained appreciation for are the really small games that have one idea and deliver on that really strongly, rather than large games. Because I think now that I have taste as a designer, I also have like a lot of annoyances that I find come up in a lot of things, where if things are either too slow or too fast, I don't push through them the same way I did before. Like to my own demerit, I feel like I get what the puzzle is about or what the system is about, and then I don't push through. But a lot of the smaller games I find very interesting because they very quickly present exactly what they're all about, and then let you discover that and then let you go, right? I think there is a lot of value in having a short but packed experience, rather than something that's long and drawn out for the sake of filling in more levels. Though, of course, I think that that I come at it from a point where I think I don't like very hard puzzles anymore, because it feels like it's not the same value for my time. Whereas I like the short and easy puzzles, but there is a trade-off there where the developer of the game is trying to have some kind of learning curve of their own, which is also to onboard players who are not as familiar with games. And I think that's something that I am still not able to enjoy, I guess, in the sense that even though I understand the pacing is slower than I'd like for a very specific purpose, sometimes it kind of irks me. But I also get it, and I do play a lot of games, so I bounce off them very easily. So that's why I think, coming back to the question, the short, sweet, and tight games are the ones that I enjoy the most.
Going off of talking about your feelings about onboarding and pacing, how did you start thinking about the onboarding in Konkan Coast?
Okay, so I think again, it's not a great example like Konkan Coast. We can call it KCPS if that makes it easier, but I don't think that it's ideal for the general audience it ended up being for. So over the course of making KCPS, I changed my understanding of what a good puzzle is. Like, I used to think going in that having things that are difficult and complicated and complex and hard to figure out is a good puzzle. But over the course of making that game, especially because those systems lead to like extreme amounts of complexity or complications which are not foreseeable, right? There's a lot of interactions that happen that you cannot be expected to foresee. So that system can very well lead into a series of levels that are extremely difficult to solve because they are complicated, because the systems lean into it. But over the course of making the game, I realized that interesting puzzles are good, not difficult puzzles. And sometimes they need to be difficult so that you can find the interesting thing, but that's not always the case. So over the course of making that game, I changed my focus in the game to make levels that are more interesting. So I'd say that it's perfectly paced only for me, to my sensibilities, which means that for a lot of like I'll say expert or hardcore puzzle players, it suits their taste well if they give it a shot. But for the average player, it doesn't, which is overall, I think, a flaw in the game because it aims at an audience and it doesn't necessarily deliver exactly what they're expecting, in the sense that like what I see that a lot of hardcore players or niche players like is a lot of difficult levels that uh, come over the course of the game, and b a lot of meta puzzles that allow them to rethink all the mechanics that they've seen and things like that. And I personally don't like those all that much. So what ended up happening is I thought I was taking the game towards a more general side, but I didn't do that at all. So essentially, it's just perfectly placed for people with my temperament and my interests, which overall means that it's for a very it's designed for a very small audience, right? So specifically, while playtesting, the people who are very familiar with puzzle games would finish it in an hour, and people who are not, if they manage to slog through, would take maybe 4 or 5 hours for the main path of the game, which is, I think, not ideal overall in terms of pacing. So I did not really think that much about onboarding for a player who doesn't like the kinds of things that I like, which is specifically rule discovery and trying different things out and seeing what works. Because the game is all about that. It's all about understanding how the different things and experimenting and trying things out. And the mechanics and the UI is all designed in such a way that encourages that kind of exploration. And not all players who are not familiar with puzzle games do that. And a lot of players who do play a lot of puzzle games uh, may not have either understood what this game is or may not have liked it because it doesn't deliver everything else that they need.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just generally very, very difficult to balance that approachability versus interestingness versus depth. It's easy to have regrets about like, oh well, this didn't end up being like great for a general audience or great for a really, really thinky audience, but more great for some people in the middle. But like actually like aiming for any of these audiences is very hard, and so if there is just a group of people who it does hit well for, then like you're already doing pretty well. um do
No,
you
just one more thing to add to that. I think a lot of these things I understood after making the game. So while making the game, I was just making what I thought was good for my taste. And then I think I realized a lot of these things about the market and different kinds of players after the game came out. And I don't know if changing the game to suit or to target any of these things is something that I'm interested in doing or would improve the game as a whole. But I just wanted to like put that out there. I think that I made the game in the best way that I knew, and I'm really happy with it. And I hope more people play it, but also I understand why they may or may not. Yeah.
Yeah, because that was going to be my next question is like, do you have a sense of like, oh, maybe I should have done this or maybe I should have done that? But it sounds like you're happy with where the game ended up and you're not overthinking it.
Yeah. For me, it's like it was my first game, and I knew I was going to learn a lot, and I learned a lot. And some of the things that I learned were about how to like position a game, how to market it in terms of having a very clear messaging as to what the game is, which I think the game, like KCPS itself, kind of struggles with from a very like inherent way, that the mechanics or why the game is interesting is not easy to show with a video or a tweet or a gif. So at the offset, it's a little hard for people to understand because there aren't too many other games that are very similar. So I can't just say it's like XYZ game. So that was, yeah, something that I learned about after finishing the game. But I'm happy with having learned that and having made the kind of game that I love.
Yeah, I mean, you can't do much better than that.
Absolutely. Looking back on it, outside of the lessons learned, is there a particular part of the project that ended up being your favorite part to work on? Either like a specific mechanic or something more specific to the process, like learning how to position or market?
I think I did some things that I have not seen other games do and which suit what the game I was making very well. So, for example, I have a set of levels that are called demonstration levels, basically, where since the game is such that your the player places the board and sets it up as they want and then kind of presses play and sees how it pans out. There are some levels where the level starts off with everything set up and the player just presses play and sees it solve itself. And that came from a place of finding a bunch of like very interesting and fun things, but not things that I could easily convert into a level in a way that was uh, suited the rest of the game. So, but I thought that the way that things played out were like very interesting. So I ended up putting in a few of these levels which are become pre-solved, and the player just watches the solution and hopefully finds it interesting, right? And I think that was one thing that I really liked. I thought that that was a nice way for me to share some of the things that I found. And another thing I think was the response from a few players that when you see someone play what you've made and really get it, like to a very deep level where you've done a lot of these small things and the player understands how what you were thinking when you put them in and they get the same thing out. I think that was very special for me. That once the game came out, I had a few players who it felt like they really understood what I was trying to say and trying to do, and that was extremely rewarding, right? So I think if I had to say my favorite part would be that seeing players understand what you're trying to say and enjoy that.
Awesome. Is there anything while we're here together on this call, and specifically while Alan is, that you want to ask Draknek about or pick our brain about?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I have one question. So it's this like for Alan. I know Alan's made a lot of these puzzle script games and Sokoban kind of games. So I was wondering whether there is any game that's come out recently that has either a system or a mechanic that surprised you specifically because you made something similar but didn't find that, or something along those lines. Right? So, Alan, do you have anything like that?
Um, One of the games that has come out this year that I was very surprised by was Leaf's Odyssey. It's kind of like Drod, where you're a person moving around, and then you've got enemies which move, and the enemies are trying to kill you, and you're trying to kill the enemies. But a lot of the depth of systems like that comes out from just the specific enemy behaviors and how they interact with each other. And like I've always found Draw a bit intimidating, where it's like you've got this sword, and the sword can be in 45-degree angles, and you can move in 45 degrees, and there's often a lot of enemies, and just felt very complex and like it would lead to fiddly solutions. And I haven't even spent that much time playing the drop games, but like that's just always been my impression. And I played Leaf's Odyssey, which is obviously playing around in that space, and it's like, oh wow, like you don't actually need a lot of the complexity. You can have very simple systems, but just choose them well and curate them such that the combinations of them lead to interesting situations. And I love that. That's actually very much outside of my wheelhouse design wise. Like I haven't yet designed a game like that, but that's the most recent example of a game that really surprised me with how much depth it could get out of a small set of mechanics. In terms of stuff closer to what I've designed, Can of Wormholes is like really brilliant in terms of like having a set of mechanics and constantly subverting expectations and making so that you are realizing deeper consequences of things that were always there and always possible, but you didn't think to try them. Obviously, the game we published, Soccer Bond Express by Jose Hernandez, was like directly riffing off a couple of games that I made, but in a way that like it combined them in such a beautiful, elegant way. It's like, oh, why didn't I think of that? But I never would have. So that was really pleasing to see and then to work with Jose on that game. And then there's just always interesting puzzle script games coming out of the Thinky Puzzle community, which are like, I mean, I think the puzzle script scene is like riffing off itself a lot. So yeah, like the games that people are making now are often inspired by other puzzle script games that have been made like 2, 3 or more years ago. And so things being made in puzzle script feel very familiar, but there's a lot of just interesting stuff constantly getting made that feels familiar but always fresh. So that's really nice.
Nice. I guess one more question for both of you is like, what do you think is like special about games as a medium and puzzle games specifically?
I mean, for me, I think that games are an inherently interesting way for the player to express their thoughts, and it's a very unique way to deliver any kind of expression. Like when you watch a movie, the director has framed the film and shot the film, and like you can watch it on a bunch of different types of TV screens or like movie screens. Or you can even watch movies on your phone. But like the content of what you're watching, the structure of it, what scene goes after the next scene has all been pre-planned. Whereas there's a lot more agency in a lot of games, and I think in puzzle games specifically, it opens up to a lot of players being able to explore mechanics, deepen their own understanding in conversation with the game in a way that is very special in the space. And I think that sort of player to game conversation that's my favorite part of this space. Alan?
Yeah, I mean, like when I'm designing something after I've been playtesting it enough, I love building up uh, a kind of understanding of the kind of mental models players will have, and then using that in the design to subvert expectations or to design an elegant system that I know will be interactive with most players and have them and have them having a good experience, because I can kind of project onto the player like, oh, this is the knowledge they're going to have going in, so this is the kind of thing that they're going to try. Yeah, like makes it so that a puzzle game can do that conversation between the player and the designer in a really elegant way that a lot of other genres, not that they can't do it, but it's less clean, I think.
One other thing that I'd love to touch on is your experience with the Draknek New Voices puzzle grant that we ran in 2022.
Yeah, sure. I think I've said this in to multiple people and multiple times, that was a turning point for me, because again, like, I was just coming out of a software job which I had left for a variety of reasons. And when I was making games, I was just like kind of exploring and trying things out. And I did not know if what became KCPS was interesting or good or worth working on, right? And I think getting selected for that program was a huge boost for me in terms of just confidence. And like, it was a signal for me that I'm on the right track. What I'm making is interesting in some way and is worth continuing working on. So I think more than anything else, it was specifically that it was validation for me as a designer, and for the things that I was working on, the way I was thinking about things. I think that really helped. Then being a part of the program itself meant I was a part of the private Discord, where there are a lot of very experienced designers who have faced all the problems that I was facing and have very succinct ways to solve them. So that part of that network was very strong and was very helpful for me in all things in the game, and also for like non-game things, in the sense that how do you make a trailer, or what should you put in the trailer, or like if you have an issue with Steam, then how can you solve that, things like that, just other game industry things. I think that was excellent for me. And finally, I had a couple of design buddies. One was Lucas Leslow and one was Mohammed, and we were all like making games around the same time and playing each other's games and giving detailed feedback and detailed discussions about the specific things that we're trying to do, right? So having that kind of community with people who are experienced and interested in the same kinds of things, and discussing very like soft things about puzzles, like how does the player feel at this point and how can you use that as a part of the game, was like very interesting for me. And I think without being a part of that grant and that community, I would not have had the same kind of confidence to continue working on the game. And definitely without the feedback of different members, uh, I would not have been able to make a game that I'm so proud of now. So I think that was really helpful for me. And once KCPS came out, it also meant that I had a very solid like resume, I guess. So when the Asta Fellowship was announced, I had something that was very, very useful to show off as a part of my back catalog, to say that this is the game that I've made and this is the way I think about things. And I think that was instrumental in me getting selected for the Asta Fellowship. So it really changed the direction of my life. I was a little lost when the program was announced. Like when the first New Voices grant was announced, I was a little unclear as to what I was doing. I had left my job and I was making a puzzle game because I thought that it might be fun to make. And now I am like a full-time game designer and game developer. I think that it all worked out really well for me, and it all started off with the that program. So if anybody's listening and is interested, I think you should be applying for these kinds of programs. And I'm very grateful to Alan and Draknek for organizing that in the first place. That it's really like put me in a path that made things a lot easier for me. So I think that was my experience.
Yeah, that's really great to hear. Do you want to talk about what you're working on at the moment, or is it still too early?
I mean, sure. I guess I am now trying to branch out a bit from the core puzzle genre. I think that I now understand what I like about like puzzly, thinky things, and I'm trying to figure out how I can put it in slightly different context. So right now I'm working on a game called Sacred Groves. It's a forest builder, so it's like a city builder but forests. So instead of having houses that want schools and electricity and hospitals, you're building like different kinds of plants and trees which care about getting water and nutrients, and they care about how much canopy coverage there is, how many roots of other plants they're connected to and not connected to. So it's kind of balancing an ecosystem to some extent. So a lot of it is inspired by like Caesar 3 specifically as a city builder, and also just the way that different mechanics in the forest work, like in like real world nature forests. So it's exciting, but again, it's very early. I think I've been on this for about a couple of months, and I'm excited. I think I'm understanding how I want to allow players to discover different interactions. I think for me, that's the core of what a puzzle or a thinky game is. It's about the players exploring and discovering interesting things. And as a designer, my role is to put them in a place, or give them the constraints, or give them the direction so that they can find like these really magical things that happen in these systems, right? So it's not exactly a puzzle game, but I think my aesthetic is very puzzly and thinky, so that will naturally bleed into the game. And but again, like it's very early on. I'm still figuring out a lot of the core things, but that's just like a high level. I don't really have anything to show yet, but that's kind of what I'm working on right now.
Yeah, I was just kind of interested to see which kind of direction you were pushing in.
Yeah, I think again, it's mostly because I like a very specific thing about puzzle games, which is what I said, right? Like allowing the player to find these emergent interactions between different systems. And while a puzzle game is like the best suited to, like, I mean, everything else is in guardrails so that the player has to discover them. I'm also now interested in seeing how you could allow players to find those same things in a slightly different setup, because I am interested in that as well. I want to see how that would translate, and how and also for this game, I'm trying to keep in mind all of the things that I learned about marketing. So I think this one has a much more clear idea of explaining what it is. Things like that are also something that I'm keeping in mind. But I think at my core, I really like the idea of emergent mechanics between different systems. So the game, I think every game I make will somehow be about that.
Sure. Good luck.
Thank you, Alan.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Where can people find you online?
So I think you can find me on Discord or Twitter at Chapliboy, CHAPLIBOY. You can also find my website at chapliboy.com. And hopefully you can find me on Steam at Konkan Coast Pirate Solutions. And I guess in other random corners of the internet, wherever interesting things are happening with puzzle games, I hope that we meet each other there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to the Draknek and Friends official podcast. Our music is by Priscilla Snow, who you can find at ghoulnoise.bandcamp.com. Our podcast artwork is by Adam DeGrandis. Please rate and review us on your podcast service of choice, and be sure to tune in next episode for more interesting conversations.